You ever see a clone trooper surrender? No, seriously, think about it. Every time a clone is backed up into a no-win situation, it seems like that's not even an option for them. Like when Commander Thorn and that detachment of clones get caught on the landing pad on Scipio, when the Separatists launch a bombing run on them and then proceed to trap them with waves and waves of droids. Thorn and his guys are surrounded and then wiped out one by one. None of these clones threw their weapons down and gave up even when it was clear there was no way for them to win. They just fought to the last man. Or like when Captain Keeley and Jedi Master I'm Gonna Die and the rest of the clone garrison on Ryloth fought to the last clone, despite being completely overrun by the attacking force.
Captain Keeley!
I'm not finished yet, sir. We can do this, General!
Let's make the end memorable!
In both of these cases, these clones refused to surrender for, pretty noble reasons. Commander Thorn was a shock trooper, a part of a diplomatic service assigned to protect Senator Padme Amidala. His duty was protecting her.
We're under attack by the Separatist garrison. Looks to be a full invasion.
Invasion?
We can't get to you. I suggest you get to a ship as soon as you can.
And given the limited options he had, he decided the best way to do that was to take out as many clankers as possible. Same thing with Captain Keeley. He was following the heroic actions of his general, I'm Gonna Die, in a delaying action designed to buy the Twi'lek refugees and resistance movement enough time to withdraw into the wildlands.
This is Republic Blockade Runner 099er. We have broken through.
The Twi'leks will live to fight another day.
These clone boys were comfortable with death, and I'm sure many of them have thought about this exact moment over the course of their short lives. After all, these clones were born and made for warfare and combat. Being a soldier was literally in their DNA. I guess you could say a lot of clones saw this as their finest moment, as their final and most important test in life. I'm sure for a lot of clones, this was the ideal situation for them, to go down in a last stand, to do something honorable with their life instead of growing old, so old that they could no longer fight anymore.
Spare any credits. Help a veteran get a warm meal.
Remember, the clones come from a soldiering culture, and so this idea of sacrificing your life is romanticized to a certain degree and also idolized, right? A lot of the heroes that these clones looked up to were probably individuals like 99, who gave his life during the Battle of Camino. And when you have a strong culture like this, it can override your basic needs and instincts to survive. The Kaminoans also had the clones genetically altered to be more obedient. They were trained to follow orders and compartmentalize their feelings. Things kind of have to be automatic on the battlefield. Oftentimes there is no time to think. It's all instincts and drilled movements. The clones were also indoctrinated, fed propaganda, but also immersed in that culture again of sacrifice and duty. All of these things were done to make them better soldiers and less afraid of the consequences of war. But the reality was all of these clones were still human beings. In the latter years of the war, the longer these clones were exposed to the galaxy, the more of a personality they developed, especially when encouraged by their Jedi commanders. And it's clear that none of them wanted to die. Sure, Fives and Tup, Waxer, Tech, and many others were all stoic till the end. But I don't doubt that a lot of these clones were, scared and sad at the very end. Maybe some of them felt a sense of relief that everything was finally over. But, this wasn't like something that they wished for. But because clones are conditioned to follow orders, they could be loyal enough so that they can mute their own survival instincts to complete a task. We take a look at Order 66 and the zombie-like state they get into. Maybe that's just a more intense version of their baseline personality. And so maybe the question to whether a clone can surrender or not is really based on what their orders are for that specific mission and what their commanders say. In Captain Keeley's case, he stood next to a Jedi commander until the very end. I'm sure if I'm Gonna Die had told Keeley to leave and help the Twi'leks escape and allow him to hold back the Separatists all by himself, he would have probably followed that order. I'm sure if I'm Gonna Die left Captain Keeley behind with a bunch of clones to hold the pass so that he could go with the Twi'leks, the clone would have been okay with that as well. These clones are disciplined, and following orders is extremely important to them. It's the basic structure of their life, the thing that keeps everything in order on this chaotic battlefield. You guys remember how long it took the 501st to finally stop following General Pong Krell's increasingly horrible orders that seemed to be designed to kill as many of their members as possible. It finally took a massive friendly fire incident orchestrated by the Jedi for the clones to actually try and arrest him. Clones did surrender, they just needed the right type of leadership. If we take a look at the raid on the Citadel prison, which was held by the Separatists during the Clone Wars, there was essentially an attempt to rescue Wilhuff Tarkin and Jedi Master Even Peel. They had both been on a mission looking for the secret hyperspace route known as the Nexus route. On their way back with the information, their Venator-class Star Destroyer was ambushed by a Separatist fleet, and a droid boarding party was tasked with recovering that hyperspace route information from the two. And from what I can tell, Even Peel ordered his men, especially the ones standing on the bridge, to stand down when those droids busted onto the bridge, and he was no longer able to win that fight. This tells me that clones can at least surrender when their commanding officer gives them the okay to do so. During the incident, the Republic actually leaves one of their own behind as well, Clone Trooper Echo. While attempting to board and commandeer a shuttle, Echo was taken out in a huge explosion and left for dead. Unbeknownst to the rest of his team, Echo would go on to survive. The Separatist medtechs would then turn him into sort of a cyborg and use his brains to give them insight on Republic infantry tactics. It was a gruesome situation, but technically, Echo was taken alive and captured. The same thing could be said about those three clones that Jango Fett's bounty hunters captured after Jango Fett blew up that entire Star Destroyer. I'm going to assume that these clones were captured unconscious by the bounty hunters. So far, it seems like these clones are willing to go to pretty extreme lengths to avoid capture, especially if they're ordered not to be captured. At the same time, I wonder if this is the clones' training, their discipline, or is this kind of learned behavior? Because remember, these clones weren't fighting other human beings or sentient beings. They were fighting droids, and they probably had a really negative perception of these droids. I mean, the Galactic Civil War was rough, but at least then you had rebels surrendering to stormtroopers and stormtroopers surrendering to rebels, because no matter how terrible the idea of an imprisoned penal work colony might seem, no matter how terrible the idea of getting fed alive to Ewoks might seem, I guess it's better than dying, or dying immediately. And so rebels and stormtroopers oftentimes gave up, and that's because both sides had lives before the Galactic Civil War. They had parents, they went to school. Many got to experience a very full range of what human beings can be like, what sentient beings can be like, the good, the bad, and everything else in between. Even stormtroopers, as terrifying and as indoctrinated as they were, are still humans. You can still reason with them. Even as horrible as the stories about Saw Gerrera's partisans were, maybe there was a chance that they might spare you. But what about the clones? What are the Kaminoans telling them about the Separatists? I mean, I can only imagine how easy it is to spread rumors that the B-1 battle droids just killed all the clones on sight because they were programmed to. I mean, military leaders all throughout history have painted their enemies savages. Most of the German army before D-Day believed that American airborne divisions were made up of criminals, murderers, and psychopaths. There are also several cases of German soldiers on the night before D-Day capturing and executing American paratroopers. It was also reported that in the first 5 days following the D-Day landing on Juno, 1 out of 7 Canadian casualties were soldiers who had surrendered but then were executed by their German captors. It could have been that those Germans were completely terrified of what the Canadians represented, although this might also be because the Canadians were fighting against the 12th SS Panzer Division, who were also near Juno Beach. They were a bunch of fanatic Nazi. So imagine you're a clone, and you've grown up being told by other clones and drill instructors that Separatist droids are not programmed to give you any quarter, and that if you surrender to them, they'll just make it easier for them to shoot you. So obviously you're not going to surrender, right? This might be why most clones we see in bad situations go down fighting rather than allow the Separatists to get close enough to capture them. But the question, I guess, is this right? Is this mentality just propaganda? Do clankers actually take prisoners?
Heavy, come in! Come in, Heavy! Heavy, come in!
Do we take prisoners?
I don't.
The droids have programming that dictates how they think and act. They also have a chain of command, and if a droid isn't wiped after a long period of time, they start to actually learn from their own experiences. Some people call this having glitches. I would say that they become more sentient. And as we can see in that previous scene, droids don't just gun down Heavy when he's down for the count and clearly not a threat anymore, right? They hesitate. And most of the time when we see droids blasting clones, it's usually fair game. Both sides are attempting desperately to kill one another, usually at very close ranges. If we take a closer look, even though the B-1 battle droids are mass-produced and, very cheaply at that, they still have independent thought. They actually pride themselves on this. It wasn't uncommon for a droid to question his orders or even complain about his orders. It happened quite a lot, actually.
Sir, we need to get our power recharged.
Not this again! How could your power cells be so depleted?
You would not let us ride on one of those creatures with you, sir. If you would allow us to close down for a few moments.
But at the same time, they really did need commanders in the field, usually tactical droids or sentient officers, to kind of lead them because they were poorly programmed and their tactical and strategic mindset just wasn't great. And so at least the B-1s aren't necessarily ruthless, they just are kind of dumb, which makes them a liability in their own way. It's a great lesson in life, by the way. Don't always suspect that people are being evil or purposely malicious, when in a lot of cases they're just being incompetent or lazy. So if you are smart enough, you could definitely convince a B-1 battle droid into taking you captive or just letting you go in some situations. Unfortunately, the clones didn't have the word surrender in their vocabulary, and so even when they were heavily surrounded and outgunned, they usually just kept on fighting. Even if the clones did get captured, there was always the question of if the Separatist Droid Army would be able to even accommodate their needs. During the underwater battle on Mon Cala, we see a large amount of clones, Gungans, and Mon Calamari get captured by Separatist Aqua droids. They are marched to a containment area, but the question I have to ask is, does the droid army have enough food and medical supplies to take on such a large amount of POWs? I actually think they generally didn't. There's really no need for stuff like medical equipment for the Separatist Droid Army, and this is one of the reasons why they are so efficient. They have ships that don't need to be pressurized, soldiers that fold up and can be stored like clothing on a rack. So I'll doubt that the Separatists will have access or the ability to clean water, or machines to refrigerate food. What about sanitation? Do they even have medical droids that can check up on the wounded? If you take a look at our own history, those dreaded Canadian stormtroopers that took no prisoners during World War I, well, it was theorized that the Canadian Expeditionary Force sent to Europe during World War I lacked the resources and infrastructure to actually hold prisoners. Surely the American airborne troops who landed in Normandy, who were scattered in small groups all across the country, didn't have the resources to take captives. It's kind of hard to judge the individual actions of these people, especially if you yourself have never been in a situation like that. But I think it's more important to not look at the individual, but the commanding officers who set up these operations in the first place. Perhaps it's important to consider that the higher level generals planning these missions, well, it's actually their responsibility to provide the manpower and infrastructure necessary to prevent their soldiers from having to make these kind of decisions in the first place. And in some cases, like with the airborne, where they're, behind enemy lines, there are no solutions to this problem. And so my conclusion for this video is yes, some clones did surrender, but generally only in very specific scenarios, where either their commanding officer leads by example or orders them to throw down their arms. That or they're caught without a weapon or completely unconscious. The clones were as hardened as some of the most fanatic soldiers we have here in our own history, and that is caused by their perception of their enemy, which might be justified to a certain extent. It's kind of sad because a lot of clones didn't really need to die if they could just change their mindset slightly. The clones were taught to value their lives just a little bit more. They could have just been like the Twilight Resistance fighters and lived to fight another day. The Separatists also should have understood that it was far more valuable to take a clone alive than just to kill them or massacre them. The Separatists should have invested in more infrastructure to actually hold prisoners. While clones probably will never give you too much information about their operations, you could use them as leverage during negotiations. Many Jedi value the lives of the clones that serve beneath them. This was really the biggest crime of the Clone Wars. This was a conflict that was fought by two disposable armies. The Separatists were using droids though, so what is the Republic and Jedi's excuse? The Republic was using live flesh and blood human beings, and the Jedi were completely complicit in sending them to their deaths. So there you have it, guys. I hope I answered your question today. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think, and as usual, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.